Welcome to Article Club.
Hello.
This is the show where we pick an article. We read said article, and then we talk about it. Yeah. And it's really the best.
It's the best.
To just spend time with you, to take part in the discourse.
Yeah.
You know?
We're keeping you hip to the hop.
Yeah. Okay,
So,
what are we reading today?
This week?
What's going on?
We are reading The Surprising Ways That Siblings Shape Our Lives by Susan Dominus. Carly and I are both people that are siblinged. It's like we're partnered.
Wow. We are both siblinged. We both happen to have a sibling.
Susan is a staff writer.
Very different situation.
Very different. And we'll talk about it. Yeah. Susan is a staff writer at the New York Times, and this is like basically a very long article that is adapted from her book called The Family Dynamic, A Journey into the Mystery of Sibling Success. So full disclosure, I both actually read this article and listened to it on the Sunday read from the Daily. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I know it forwards and backwards, but it's a doozy. So join us for the ride, folks. But Susan kind of starts with talking about how the fact that she attributes the fact that she is a journalist to her brother, basically saying, coming home from college and being like, you should work for the school newspaper. And she like really valued his opinion, and she was like, okay. And so they didn't even have a school newspaper. She started one. And she was like, I just think if my parents had told me that, I would have just I probably wouldn't even remember them telling me that. And so she talks about, everyone thinks there's so much research on like parent-child impact and parent-child dynamics, but that we really don't give enough studying or credence to the sibling impact. And so some of the research that she walks through, she also does like 3 or 4 deep dives on families of siblings and what those like dynamics look like, to sort of illustrate her points. But the first one is like researchers have studied how siblings influence each other and like how that impacts their life trajectory through like competition or this thing called the spillover effect, which is basically the ripple of like how one sibling's life impacts another. And Zhang's research, I found this wild, found that nearly a third of siblings' academic similarity can be attributed to the spillover effect. So like, as opposed to like their shared environment or like their genetics. So just like if your sibling
or any other factor.
Right. But it can also work negatively. Mm-hmm. And then they've also brought like more, she talks about like kind of the more robust data that's happened around birth order, which I found fascinating. And before we dive in, one of my favorite books probably of like the last decade was called The Sibling Effect, written by this guy, Jeffrey Kugler. And so I have found the sibling dynamics fascinating for a really long time. So
I feel like you and I always talk about sibling dynamics too, outside of this.
Just at play. But maybe everyone does, and we just think we're unique, but we're, in fact, the norm. Who knows? So she walks through a couple of different sibling profiles, like seemingly, most of these I feel like she's talking about are like very high-achieving
she
sibling
picks very
sets.
high-achieving siblings.
In different ways, and, how if you have like an academic elder, so she talks about one family like the Groffs, where like they have a academic, the first one is super academic, and then the second one is like a novelist, and then the youngest one was like, okay, well, my older siblings are both, really smart, bookish smart, so like I'm going to get into sports. And like, would that have happened if her older siblings had been more athletic or whatever? But I just found this all fascinating.
Okay.
Where to begin?
Sibling dynamics. We've always known they're important, but I always thought it was birth order, not necessarily how your sibling is. So I know those two things are intertwined.
Yeah.
But I've been obsessed with what I thought was birth order, but maybe this whole time it's really about sibling dynamics.
It's like a reaction to your sibling.
Exactly.
Sibling.
And 2, parenting doesn't matter? Question mark? Right? I'm like equal sides relieved and annoyed that, back to your previous comments on pods, like, is it capitalism that is telling parents you need to buy all these things for your kids, you need to be perfect, you need to do all this stuff to set them up for success, or they will fail miserably? But really, it's the sibling dynamic, which you actually have very little control over.
Yeah.
Except whether or not you have them.
Choose to give them. Yeah. She didn't talk about, one thing I love about my favorite book, The Sibling Effect, is that he talks about only children.
What's your favorite book?
Top 5.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But she doesn't talk about only children at all. I mean, maybe just because that's not the point of her research, but I think it would be interesting for her to
dove
into that a little bit.
I bet the trends still stand that it is so true. 2 parents, 1 child. You have so much more time to give to that one child.
Oh,
Even
yeah.
in pregnancy, she talks about you're more careful with that pregnancy. We used to just like gaze into my daughter's eyes, because she was our first and only. Now that we have two, this poor second child, we're like, okay, we're frazzled, we're busy, onward.
Yeah.
So I can imagine with an only child, you likely have that same attention.
I remember my cousin talking about one of her friends and her third child, and she was like, oh yeah, she just carries that one around like a sack of flour. Like he's just like, boop,
yeah,
and just brought along for the ride.
My husband and I, we often say, oh, poor our son's bear, poor bear, poor buddy. We're just like, see ya, dude,
But I thought the part that Dominus talks about that was interesting was that if you actually invest in that first child, like that,
it's a good investment in your second.
Exactly. Yes. Like the better, the socioeconomic factors of this all as it relates to siblings, I thought was so interesting. So like, for example, like the things that she talks about is one, socioeconomic, like if you have a lower socioeconomic level, then you are actually likely to spend more time with your sibling because you're not, all these like elite parents are putting their kids in different sports and like they're scheduled within an inch of their life and activities. And so they're separated from their siblings more. But if you have less income, you are likely putting your kids in less extracurriculars. And so their sibling actually has more impact on how they turn out. But the flip side of that was like, if you actually invest in your eldest child, that like there's like a trickle down economics, a trickle down impact on your younger siblings.
And likewise, if something bad happens and if there's trauma or something that impacts the older kid, the grades suffer, and then the other kids' grades suffer too.
Yeah. One thing she didn't talk about in this, but I know from the sibling effect, is that there's also sort of this, if you have an elder sibling of really high achievement, so there's data around more presidents are firstborn children. Some of the data is a little like construed because they also count like only children as firstborn children. So that's a little messy. But if you're a firstborn child, then you've like achieved incredible success. That actually like firstborn children presidents, oftentimes their youngest siblings are total fuck ups because they're like, I can't, it's like so outside the realm that like they're more likely to be alcoholics or have like, just like can't keep a job, like sort of the other end of the spectrum.
So interesting. I thought the youngest child athlete thing was so interesting.
I know.
So if you follow the thread of oldest child gets all this attention and is more academically inclined because you're just paying more attention and you're talking to them more.
Yeah,
whatever
Ivy League schools actually have a higher representation of
than youngest
older siblings.
Kids. If they're, if all of these dynamics are working and they want to sort of differentiate away from that, but also be really successful, younger children skew higher in all of these professional sports.
Yeah.
So there's two mechanisms specifically that she talks about, and we're sort of glossing over them. Differentiation, which is, hey, this is happening, and this happened in my family, right? My sister is in finance and very successful in that sort of realm, and I very much was like, I'm going to go in a completely different direction, just as motivated, just as driven, but I'm the creative one. She's the finance one. I totally saw that play out. I'm choosing this lane to go succeed in.
Yeah.
And then spillover, which is I see my sibling achieving, I see my sibling doing those things, that motivates me to do as well, whether it's in the same sort of field or different field. So, Allison Grant, how has spillover and differentiation reared its head in your sibling dynamic?
That's so well. So I think for us, my brother has known since he was like 7 that he wanted to do something medical. He used to want to be a veterinarian. Like I remember he made this sign for his door that had this giant like needle coming out of it, like a what you'd give someone a vaccine with, that he drew when he was like 7 years old, and it was like Dr. Grant, knock before entering kind of thing. But he really wanted to be a veterinarian for a long time, and then he ended up going to medical school and as a doctor. And I never showed interest in that, so I'm sure it was some differentiation. Although I don't feel like I really knew how I was going to like academically differentiate. And then in sports again, but we also have different genders, so I think that. He talks about the fact that it is different if you're same gender versus, or she talks about the difference if you're same gender.
She touches on that very lightly. It comes out in the, Lauren Groff wanted to write big feminist literature because she had this domineering older brother who she felt like was like a know-it-all, which I loved. I was like, yes, girl. Yeah. But she doesn't really get into if they're a boy first and a girl. There's just sort of these underlying simmers. Maybe that's a whole other book.
Yeah. And then with sports, my brother was really good at sports. Like he was an academic All-American, and he and that could also, I'm like, I wonder how much of that is parents, because like my mom coached our like YMCA soccer team, so that was just sort of what they signed us up for. But
And
it
is
was
super
definitely,
athletic.
yeah, it was definitely like wanting to
Hi, Meryl.
achieve as much, or if not more, than he did in sports. Like he didn't play a sport in college, and I chose to play a sport in college. So I think that I'm sure I like to think of myself as I'm not. I don't give into these norms, but I'm like, no, I'm probably all of these norms in the bucket.
It feels so real to me. I even have on my Instagram profile right now, well-adjusted middle child. Because being a middle child, I am a middle child of 3 girls. We're all 2-ish years apart. And I was in high school with both my older sister and younger sister at different times. So the dynamics are fascinating. I think it really prepares you for life.
In what way?
Oh my gosh, good ways and bad ways. Maybe I can speak to the sort of like differentiation spillover stuff. Well, I will back up. My parents were both middle-ish children also. So they were middle of in 4, like of 4. So they had like 2 of them in the middle each. And I think they were highly attuned to the
Middle
birth
dynamic.
order. They both felt like they weren't treated. They were sort of second-class citizens to the eldests. And they were hyper aware of that with me. They didn't want me to feel that way. So I think that this was very true to them. The eldest is the king or the queen or whatever. So they always treated my older sister and I like 2 oldest. And as soon as I came along, I was sort of expected to just like, come on, join the crew. Here's what we're doing. And then my little sister was the baby for sure. So I feel like that dynamic differentiates.
Like do you feel like you were treated as a second first child?
Yeah. Yes. And I think that caused some frustration with the eldest child, who's like, I should have these oldest privileges, or I get the bad side of it, but then she gets to do it too. They're like, that is pretty tricky. And my older sister is brilliant, super ambitious. And she and I were both sort of like intrinsically motivated, but completely differentiated the things that we did.
Yeah.
There was a bunch of overlap. We played field hockey, and then of course, then our little sister played field hockey. But I was the one who, I'm going to go play field hockey in college while you go do these other things. Same with theater. So, the differentiation really resonates with me in a way that you don't have to compete, especially if you're the same. If you're both women, like you don't have to compete if you're going into different directions. I felt like that felt safe to me.
Yeah.
We've also talked a little bit about like the stories you tell yourself.
Oh, I have a question here. Like, is this just the stories we tell ourselves, or is it real?
Exactly. And like, well-adjusted middle child is like a story. Is like one of those canned things that I feel like is a story about me that's easy to tell.
Yeah.
And we've also talked about this before. I remember thinking I was bad at math and telling myself that story, and seeing my sister, who was good, she's good with good with, STEM, let's call it that. And I was like, I'm much more of a creative type. I'm a writer. I'm all those things. So I'm going to go in that different direction.
Yeah.
And then my little sister very much being like, oh my God, these 2. Like she came into high school, Katie and Carly's sister, like the third Leahy sister. And I know she's sort of like, good Lord. And has carved her own path.
I don't think that I had, I don't feel like I had that little sister, and I don't know if this is because we're different sex or not, but I don't feel like I had that, like, I'm the kid's sister. I always tell people, like, similar, I'm a well-adjusted middle child. I always say...
Oh, I thought you told people I'm like, you are. Did you hear me?
Yeah.
I was just about to get on you. You were not a middle child.
My mom has told me that they thought about having a third kid, and I would not have been, I think, a well-adjusted middle child.
Well, I was talking to somebody yesterday who is she's an oldest and the only girl. Wait, no, youngest and only girl. And I was like, that is a complete opposite of my dynamic. And that sounds like a dream. A, to be the only girl. B, like to be the baby. Like what? Like it's just like I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, can't even imagine.
Yeah.
But yes, the story the like line I always say is that, like, in my family, I definitely behave as the youngest, like as the younger child, because I'm like the funny jokester. I'm like always sort of like la la la, like here, I like would do dances and performances and stuff when we were younger. But I do think that in our siblingship we're more, I mean, I'm sure Campbell would disagree with this, but I'm like, I feel like we have less of the like older, younger sibling dynamic. Again, my favorite book, The Sibling Effect, talks about same-sex relationships end up having a more intense relationship, both in terms of closeness and rivalry.
Yeah, that
so
doesn't surprise me.
I never felt like we were competing for things.
Yeah, that's nice. And having a older girl and a little boy now myself, I'm very glad that they have that separate. They're a little further apart. I feel like they'll have different, especially since my daughter is an absolute force of nature. Like I feel like it would be hard to be the second girl after her. You said your parents thought about, oh, do we have a third kid and what that would do to the dynamics. It is very in the parent zeitgeist right now of how to manufacture the correct sibling relationships, dynamic in your family. And she talks about, she says, trying to manage those dynamics is like impossible chess. But people are doing, should I have the third? Because then these two will be able to, even Amy Poehler on our podcast the other day was joking about, I always wished I had a third sibling so I had somebody to talk shit about my brother with, which is to me as one of three, I'm like, that only sounds good to you because you don't know what it's like. Like comes around the other way too. And I also see this.
You're like, you're ganging up on me.
I also see this pattern of wanting what you didn't have.
Yeah.
My husband was one of two. You know, he has a sister. I have the two. And he would have another kid for, you know, he wants that bigger thing. He thinks, oh, 3 would be so nice. 4 would be so nice. It's a bit of this, you know, oh, that way must have been better.
I had my college friends, remember we were having a debate around should you have 3 kids because then if one dies you have the other one has someone that they can like console with that other than just the parents. And I was like,
is this 1642?
This is insane. Yikes. Like that these are what you I guess
to that point
what you think about.
There's a lot of you know, if I only have one kid, am I putting too much on that kid to take care of me as I'm older? And friends of mine, I think 1 is the new 2. Especially today, we're having kids later. We got a lot to do.
And 0's the new 1.
And my comfort to those friends, I say, no. Like this is a dawn of a new era. There will be mostly only children, you know, running around these days. And you will set it all up. This isn't like the old days where it was like, oh, shoot, there's only 1. Now what do I do? You know, it's like, this will be planned and it will be fine. There's no way. Like,
right. And again, having
you'll have kid,
having a kid isn't a guarantee of that either.
Of course.
They there's some data around like basically what percentage of sibling relationships are toxic or like are irreparable, unrepairable. Are those the same word?
They both sound right to me.
But roughly 10% of sibling relationships are toxic, and then the other like 85 to 90%.
Roughly 10% are toxic.
This is from the Sibling Effect as well. But 85% are like anywhere from fixable to terrific. So it's but like that's a high percentage when you think about like relationships dynamics. I don't know. Like that feels pretty good to me.
Yeah, that feels pretty good.
It's your longest relationship of your life, probably.
Yeah.
If it's not toxic.
It's yeah, it just really got me thinking about how do I, of course, then it's like, it's not what the parents do. She's a really, and I'm going to butcher it, but she has a really nice way of saying, she says, you know, the parents point the direction into the solar system or whatever. They are the sun, but the sibling is the like comet. It's the like sparkly comet, like shows you where to go kind of thing, which I think is really sweet. But of course, as a control freak and a parent, I'm like, okay, well, how do I put the sun up in the sky in the right place? And then how do I make sure, you know, like the eldest is the sparkly object that the second needs. Back to the gender thing, I am also thinking a lot about boys being behind as in the zeitgeist. There's a lot of talk of holding boys back in school.
Yeah.
And she talks about the Zhang
boys
family.
Are not all right.
Yeah, exactly. One of the families that she followed. Yeah. One of the families she followed, this wasn't a boy they held back, but they
this was
when
cool.
they moved from China to the US, they put their eldest daughter 2 years below in a grade 2 years below her age,
right?
Because she didn't speak English yet, but she caught up on the English, no problem. She's brilliant, and then, you know, had maturity, was able to just really thrive and succeed, and then that set the bar for all the other kids. And there's a lot of talk right now about boys developmentally are just behind girls. How do you give them that same leg up?
Yeah.
And again, it's like manufacturing the dynamic, but
yeah. So I mean, when she was talking about even Michelle Obama as a like good example of this, where it's like her older brother ended up playing a sport at Princeton. They would have never thought about Ivy Leagues. But then they're like, well, Craig, she was like, well, Craig went to Princeton, so I don't know.
Maybe I could.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like you think about how many.
Yes, she talks a lot about how Craig was the favorite, and even Craig is like, I was the favorite, which is so, and the whole, and then Michelle's like, I'm in the White House. My mother lives with me in the White House, and she's still like, when's Craig coming?
Yeah.
She's like, are you kidding me?
Do you think that parents have a favorite child?
Yes.
And I'm like, we won't wait you confess.
No, I mean, it's complicated.
Yeah,
no. You love your kids, but like, I totally believe in favorites now in a way that when you're a kid, you tell yourself, oh no, parents aren't capable of having favorites. That can't possibly be true, but it is absolutely true. And I think those things ebb and flow. Like, you know, I saw something like in my parent feed on TikTok. It's like, I don't have a favorite child. I just have one that I try not to piss off. And it's like this toddler who's like about to like absolutely destroy you. There's like one you're more scared of. So that like it has to factor into things. Evolves. It doesn't really have anything to do with love, but it's like, all right, there's one that's just giving me trouble.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're both perfect.
I don't know.
Never heard of them. Never heard of it.
I think a lot of, she talks about the Emanuel brothers.
Yeah.
And I feel like they're often heralded as like this trifecta superpower. Like, you know, you have the one who's like the Hollywood agent that Entourage is built off of. You have one as like this brilliant neuroscientist. And then you have like Rahm, who was the chief of staff to Obama. And how much of that is just like was it just the first one that I think it was Zeke that was the scientist and did so well? Or like how much, like what are all the factors? Like I'm curious how much of an impact the sibling effect or like your siblings have on your success overall. Like is it 60%? Is it 10%? Like some of this just, of all of these families that she talks about, like some of them like just like, wow, you guys are like a super family. Like what else is it? Is it just the sibling piece or what else is it?
I mean, there was a lot of like parents were absent, so the siblings were doing a lot of that, but the parents were very hardworking.
Right.
I feel like that was the common thread. It was like the Groffs had groffiness as their sort of core value, and fundamentally they were all striving to achieve and work hard. What about you know, non-classical success, right? Like an artist who's making beautiful art, or someone who chooses to stay at home. Like, why do you think she chose the most successful people? Just so that she could see it would be more of like a stark contrast? Or
Well, I think it's just like, it's like if I can give this example of this incredible family. Sure, you could have one example where one child is, you know, the Secretary of State and whatever, but if all three of these children have achieved these like extreme high levels of success, there must be something really special. So like what are the factors that contribute to that? I thought a lot about, okay, so all of these people are adults, really. Like none of them were, you know, still, and I guess you would have to have them be adults to quantify what the impact has been. But I was curious, like just thinking about all of the moms that I've been talking to lately and how like what a lot of these children had, I feel like both like for themselves and with their sibling relationships was autonomy. And I feel like so many of my friends' kids, and granted they're much younger, like they're, you know, toddlers for the most part, like don't have any autonomy. And so, and you know, she talks about even like higher wealth kids spend less time with their siblings because they're so scheduled out between like violin and tennis and soccer and basketball and whatever. So I'm curious if you actually need this more organic time for kids to interact together for this. Like, I'll be curious, like for your kids' generation, like will the sibling effect be diminished, or what will that look like?
It feels like to me, these kids, when they were kids, were all very securely attached. So they felt love and they felt unity within their family unit, and then had the freedom to go away and then come back to the family unit in a way that allowed them to explore and come back. And she notes sort of the Groff family pokes up with like, okay, her dad, Sarah wanted to swim the length of the pond, and he was like, this is going to be a mess. Do it. But he's like rode, you know, like that's like they had that sort of not loose grip. They had that sort of like secure attachment
and like flexibility to have to even think of that. Who has the time now to be like, let's spend all of Sunday swimming to Angel Island.
Yes, and this comes back to that we don't let kids out of our sight conversation that we were having. Free range parenting, exactly, and that crazy stat that stay-at-home moms spent 60% less time with their kids than full-time working moms do today.
Yeah.
And it's not, right, which is crazy. And you look at that and you're like, oh, these stay-at-home moms of the 60s, they hated their children, whatever. No, the kids were just off playing, in the neighborhood. There was this collective way to take care of your kid, and that's how they were able to form relationships and understand how the world worked.
Yeah, and power dynamics and whatever.
Today, and I feel this so heavy, it is like, I'm in control of my household. And if anybody leaves the household, it's because I'm driving them or I'm signing them up for something or I'm like that gatekeeper. Yes, I have younger kids, but that sort of like collective upbringing and I live far from family, So I do think there's something in that, in those different patterns. How do you create that sort of secure attachment?
I don't know. We'll have to ask the Groffs.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing something right. But okay, now my parenting stress has shifted from am I doing like playing baby Mozart in the womb and doing flashcards to how do I make sure the sibling dynamic is
sounds like
productive?
You can.
Yeah, I know. Sounds like you can. Which is also, you know what?
Yeah, let it go.
And it comes down to, as I always say with parenting things, EQ.
Yeah.
You do your best.
Yeah. Did your parents foster your relationship, or like do you remember them having any?
Not. I don't really remember that.
Yeah.
I remember them treating us all like adults from the time we were like we could barely speak, and it was like you just behave. Like, I just remember this, like, standard was set, which is interesting because I think a lot of what we're talking about here is, like, the standard. When you see a standard achieved, then it's possible. And it's like with so many other things in life. It's like you see somebody run the mile in the gauntlet and, like, really fast. You know that that's possible, and maybe you run a little bit faster. It's psychological. They parented with this sort of, this is what we're doing as a family unit. We all treat each other with respect, and here's the standard. But there definitely wasn't my family is not you should call your mom. You should call your sister. Like it wasn't,
same.
And I really appreciate that.
Same.
And maybe it's a personality thing. Like the thing I want to do least is the thing you tell me to do. Like I want to be intrinsically motivated to
You've got
make
the
connections and do those things. But sometimes when you're a kid, maybe you do need some more of those pushes.
Yeah.
We, unfortunately, as three girls who are 2 years apart, it really becomes like, that's my stuff. That's my stuff. Get out of my space. When you're an adolescent, you're trying to figure out who the hell you are.
Yeah.
You're like, it was a lot about like, I want to watch what I want to watch. It was just a lot of that for, in those tricky years. And then you grow out of that and you become parents together. And there's so many, I feel like our sibling dynamic later in life has just been so lovely.
Do you feel like there was I think about, like, for me, when you were siblings growing up, I think our family didn't really like force our relationship at all. It was very much so like we have a family unit and then like however the chips fall, whatever.
Yes.
But I feel like my brother and I have had a shift from our like youth relationship to like our adult relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that like literally we've had to talk about, or I've been like, like, how do we relate? It's a very different dynamic, or like, what does closeness look like? Or how do you think about that? Because I think it's different as adults than it is as kids, where you don't have especially because we don't live close to each other, where you don't have as many of those opportunities. And I mean, I am so grateful. I would be very curious, like she didn't talk a lot about how the sibling impact changes as you become an adult and like what, especially as I think about like the sandwich generation and needing to take care of your parents and like basically what is or having kids, for example. Like I am so grateful that my brother had kids before I did, because that meant that like he scratched the grandkids' itch.
I literally saw how a kid fit into our broader family dynamic because my sister had a kid. She made it like I knew, you never know what to expect, but that was a game changer.
Yeah, but it totally I love my nieces; they're so fun, and it just gave me permission to not do it if I wanted to. So I was like, wow, what a great sibling dynamic shift.
Yeah.
And then there's also like not the downsides, but the sort of like. And I know you and I both talked about this, where both of our older siblings live close to our parents, which I'm sure is something in the sibling effect. And like they have some sort of obligation more so than we do. And they both had kids before us, which sometimes makes sense if they're older. But that like, then it's like, okay, well, who's taking care of them, our parents, for certain things? Or like, what are they doing for you? Like my mom watches my nieces all the time. And like, that is so great. But I'm getting less reps than that. So like, how do there's just different dynamics.
Yeah, that's interesting. And fairness. Oh my gosh, we haven't even scratched the surface. That like Santa Claus had to get the same thing in 3 different colors. Like fairness. It was like, she got the and that does continue. It's like the fairness of the like, oh, that, there's still those tricky dynamics. One thing that just occurred to me, I have a hypothesis that is not based on anything but my own experience that, my older sister and I sort of treated as eldest. We differentiated into these different paths, like go, 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 go. And the youngest is actually the one who's the most like emotionally connected to the rest of the family. Like she's the one who says, I love you, like all the time. She's the, like, and whereas we're like, we're busy and we're onward and and that's like a very, very sweet, that's something very, very sweet. There was a moment where Sarah Groff, like Lauren and Sarah were on the phone just like in silence when Sarah was having a hard time. So, maybe there's something about witnessing all that chaos and that achievement or whatever that actually opens you up to being sort of not like the rest aren't loving, but the more emotionally connected one.
Yeah. And because you have less obligation on your shoulders to like do all these other things or be the, leader, trailblazer, whatever. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just spill over, baby.
Spill over. Oof. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Wow.
Shall we?
Oh, yes, we shall. Okay. Let's move to our segment called Blowing Up the Group Chat. Allison, what's blowing up your group chat
blowing
today?
Up the group chat. Okay, so there's been a lot of discussion around airlines. Last week I had to
Newark.
cancel. Yeah, I was supposed to fly out of Newark last week. I had to cancel the flight and reroute myself out of LaGuardia because I was like, I can't put myself in that shitstorm. And it's not good when the Department of Transportation literally won't let his wife fly into Newark. But lots of my friends have been flying, and what's blown up the group chat is what is up? I think people are just more anxious when they're flying now because of these collisions, these like airport issues, losing control. And so I think people are paying more attention to their environments in and around the planes. And what's blown up the group chat is baby pilots. So, the pilots are a legacy audience. Or legacy career people. I feel like I don't have any guy friends that I grew up with that became pilots. Like I sort of feel like our generation like skipped that. So, but then you got these older pilots retiring, and
the silver fox is who we love,
and they got to bring in the fresh blood. But now that it's sort of like when you look at college basketball, and like in my mind, I'm like, I'm the same age as these guys, and now I'm looking at them and I'm like, oh, they're so young. The pilots are babies.
We have gotten a couple pictures of baby pilots, low-key,
in the wild
on the group chat. It's like, wait a second. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. Stressful.
Baby pilots. But as anything that we gotta backfill. It's like the.
So how old do you think? So you gotta. I saw a picture yesterday.
Yeah, I think he's like 25.
You can fly a commercial plane at 20. I guess.
I bet he's like number 2. I'm sure. Who knows? I hope he's not number 1.
Wait.
But there's 2 pilots.
Right.
So I bet
isn't
he's number 2.
one the co-pilot? That I'm fine with. I'm fine with the baby being the co.
Yeah, well, we don't know if he's pilot or co-pilot.
But that picture seemed pretty authoritative.
Yeah.
Like he was in the seat.
No, he wasn't in the seat. He was standing outside the jet bridge.
Maybe I've seen more than one baby.
Yeah,
baby pilot.
Could be.
Aye. Okay. Well,
baby pilots.
Baby pilots.
Keep us posted if you spot him in the wild.
Yes, please do. Send.
Or
at
any
Article Club on Instagram.
millennial pilot, age
Or
pilots.
any hot pilots.
Yeah, we'll take
Just
it
send
all.
them. I'm getting speaking of pilots, I'm getting all these like Instagram things of like our whole family's flying and it was a surprise that our dad was flying the plane. Or do you get these?
Wait.
I don't know what's happening. The dad's a pilot and it's like he surprised us and flew us on the trip and we didn't know he was going to be flying us.
No.
Whatever. How niche.
Not in
It's
that
like multiple
subcategory.
There's like
But now I'm sure my phone heard
But
you.
probably
and
because
it'll
I'm
happen
like
now.
what's happening at Newark.
Yeah.
Okay. What's blowing up my group chat, you'd think is old news, but kind of related to all of these like psychological personality dynamics we're talking about with siblings. The Enneagram is back. I'm here to say.
I don't think it ever left.
I don't think it ever left too, but I'm surprised of how many people actually have never heard of the
Really?
Enneagram.
So you're like, oh, you're such a 7.
Yes.
And people are like, what do you mean?
I'm like, well, that's because I'm a 7. Yeah. And they're
you are
like, and I'm
such a
like, oh,
7.
Enneagram. People are like, what a gram or whatever. So Enneagram, it's a personality. It's basically a quiz you take. There's 9 personality types. Mm-hmm. And it is so just dead on. It's really easy to take the personality, the whatever. I'm here to say, marry a 2. A 2 is a helper. That's what you want to do. My husband's a helper. Thank God. I'm a 7. I'm an enthusiast. Which means like new things
Shiny
all the
object
time.
syndrome.
Shiny objects. Let's go. Can be a little scattered, but who cares? Da da da. Like whatever. And especially this has been with some new friends. And when you get to meet new people, it's actually, and it's a fun little thing. Take the time. Oh, you are like that. Even in the short time I've known you, that totally seems like a 6.
Wow.
What are you?
I don't know what a 6 is. I'm a
6 is like the loyalist, like worries a little bit, like so loyal, thoughtful, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that does sound like a good friend.
Yeah.
I'm a 3.
What's 3 again?
I think it's like the producer or like it's basically like I have a huge bias towards action. I love a fucking checklist. I'm like, let's get things going. Let's get them done.
Great.
Yeah.
I feel like I got
I'm a
some
3 wing
three.
too, actually. So
Okay.
I don't think of myself as a
I need
as
to
a 2,
figure out
but
my wings.
You might not have a wing.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
You
How do
got-
I figure
yeah,
out my
you're
wings?
I don't know. Mine told me.
They all these annoying things online. They're like, pay us.
So I know you get through like
to
a
see the
30-minute questionnaire,
Yeah,
and then
no
they're
way.
like, for $99.99.
Yeah, but you can see it gives you like the first 2 sentences before it blurs it out, and even through that, it's like, yeah, you can
just take a
kind of get the
screenshot and
gist.
put that into
But
ChatGPT.
there's no way. Yeah, there's no way you're going to get wings from that. So anyway, you might have to pay $10, but I'm telling you, it's worth it. Okay, that's all the time we got
All the time we got.
on the Article Club. I don't even know what kind of accent was that. German?
Maybe.
Wow, I'm like really feeling it in
Okay.
in the flow here. Should we just do another one
Yeah,
while
just
we're
keep
here?
it going.
While
Okay.
we've got the accents going. Okay, so lovely to see you.
Likewise.
See you
soon.
all next time.
Bye.
Bye.